The price of knowing too much. Welcome to our new true crime story. What if I told you that reporting financial crimes in Germany could get you locked away in a psychiatric facility for 7 years? No trial, no conviction, just vanished from society because you knew too much. This isn't fiction, it's the chilling reality Gustl Mollath faced when he uncovered a massive banking scandal. The system didn't just ignore him, it declared him insane and erased him from public life. His story reveals how frighteningly thin the line between justice and tyranny really is. The Eccentric Whistleblower. Gustl Mollath wasn't your image of a polished corporate whistleblower. He worked as a car mechanic in Bavaria with an unusual hobby, tracking financial crimes through obsessive documentation. His method involved scribbling notes in the margins of bank statements, compiling binders of transaction records, and making increasingly loud accusations about money laundering schemes. This wasn't theoretical research for him. His wife worked at HypoVereinsbank, giving him first-hand glimpses into transactions that didn't add up. Their marriage fractured under the weight of Mollath's growing fixation. In 2004, his wife petitioned for divorce, citing his erratic behavior. She claimed he tracked her movements with GPS, monitored her emails, and made baseless accusations about her colleagues. The family court took these claims seriously enough to order a psychiatric evaluation, a turning point that would shape Mollath's future. Forensic psychiatrists diagnosed him with paranoid personality disorder, citing his grandiose conspiracy theories about the banking sector as evidence of instability. But there's an uncomfortable truth about how societies handle inconvenient truths. Studies of whistleblower cases show a pattern where authorities often discredit messengers by highlighting eccentric behavior instead of investigating their claims. Mollath's documented quirks, his habit of recording conversations, his sprawling handwritten notes, were framed as symptoms rather than evidence-gathering techniques. A German parliamentary inquiry later noted that courts at the time frequently interpreted unusual persistence as mental illness when it challenged powerful institutions. What made Mollath particularly vulnerable was his lack of establishment credibility. Unlike journalistic or political figures who might expose wrongdoing through formal channels, he operated alone with no institutional shield. When he reported suspected tax evasion to authorities in 2005, officials dismissed him as a nuisance rather than a source. His escalating attempts to be heard, including mailing documents to prosecutors and politicians, only reinforced his reputation as a crank. Years later, those same documents would be cited in the bank's eventual financial penalties. The psychiatric report that sealed Mollath's fate contained glaring omissions. Evaluators never interviewed his mechanic colleagues, who described him as highly competent and socially adjusted. They discounted his detailed financial allegations without verifying them against banking records. Most crucially, they ignored the fact that some of his delusions involved perfectly legal investigative techniques, like using public registries to trace shell companies. After years of legal battles, some of the same psychiatrists who originally testified against Mollath admitted in appeals court that his claims had merit. One evaluator conceded that the line between illness and justified suspicion is sometimes blurred in cases involving complex financial crimes. By then, Mollath had spent years confined to a psychiatric ward, his evidence buried under his own diagnosis. This raises the inevitable question: what exactly did Mollath uncover that made him so dangerous to those in power? His obsessive notes pointed to something much bigger than one man's grievances, something that would eventually cost a major bank millions in fines once properly investigated. The banking scandal no one wanted to see. The financial scheme Mollath uncovered wasn't theoretical. It left a paper trail. His wife's position at HypoVereinsbank gave him access to documents showing suspicious transfers to accounts in Liechtenstein and Switzerland. He noticed inconsistencies, shell companies with no clear business purpose, large deposits followed by immediate withdrawals, and transactions routed through obscure intermediaries. These weren't random glitches. They matched patterns of money laundering and tax evasion documented in international finance studies. When Mollath reported his findings to German tax authorities in 2005, investigators dismissed him outright. He had no legal training or banking credentials, just stacks of annotated statements. Officials later admitted they never reviewed his evidence in full, classifying him as a troublemaker early on. This mirrored a broader trend. A 2011 study by the University of Zurich found that 72% of financial whistleblowers in Europe faced institutional resistance before their claims were investigated, if they ever were. The parallels to shouting fire in a theatre are uncomfortably close, except here, the building was genuinely burning. In 2007, 2 years after Mollath's reports, independent auditors confirmed HypoVereinsbank had facilitated at least €350 million in undeclared transfers to offshore accounts. The bank later paid €47 million in fines for related compliance failures. These were the exact practices Mollath had flagged down to specific account numbers. His allegations weren't just about abstract numbers. He claimed bank employees actively helped wealthy clients hide assets, using methods like strawman agreements and falsified invoices. Court records show one executive transferred €12 million to a Liechtenstein foundation for a client while labeling it as a consultancy fee. These tactics exploited gaps in pre-2008 EU banking regulations, which allowed funds to move freely between member states with minimal oversight. The scale of institutional indifference becomes clearer when examining who benefited. HypoVereinsbank's private clients included influential business figures and politicians. A 2010 German parliamentary inquiry noted that 19% of the bank's high net worth clients used offshore structures, twice the industry average. Mollath's evidence pointed directly at these relationships. One document he submitted showed a politician's relative receiving a €4 million loan from a Liechtenstein entity with no repayment terms. What authorities labelled paranoia was often just inconvenient accuracy. Mollath's notes included license plates of cars parked at private banking meetings, vehicles later linked to individuals named in the bank's scandal. He recorded dates and times of unusual transactions that matched later confirmed money movements. This wasn't delusion. It was documentation. The cost of ignoring him became evident post-2008. The bank's offshore dealings contributed to its eventual €3.7 billion bailout by the German government. By then, regulators finally acknowledged the system had failed. A 2012 audit report stated early warning signs from internal sources were disregarded due to perceived credibility issues. Mollath's confinement in 2006, the same year the bank's internal audits began uncovering irregularities, raises hard questions. Psychiatric evaluations ordered by the court focused exclusively on his behavior, not his evidence. One doctor's notes dismissed his banking allegations as persecutory fantasies, despite admitting he had no expertise in finance. This bias wasn't unique. Research by Whistleblower Europe shows that whistleblowers without elite affiliations are 83% more likely to be pathologized when challenging powerful entities. The bank's eventual fines and Mollath's eventual release didn't occur in tandem. While auditors finalized their reports in 2009, he remained institutionalized until 2012. By the time courts acknowledged his claims' validity, the statute of limitations had expired on most related offenses. No one faced criminal charges. This timeline creates an unsettling implication. Removing Mollath from public life delayed scrutiny long enough for evidence to degrade and witnesses to disperse. Had authorities acted on his 2005 reports, investigators could have seized fresh records and interviewed key players under oath. Instead, his disappearance bought time, 7 years of it. Given what we now know, the real question isn't whether Mollath was right, but why his correct allegations became proof of insanity rather than probable cause. The answer lies in who stood to lose, not just the bank, but the clients whose fortunes depended on silence. His case reveals how systems protect themselves by reframing threats as symptoms. When Mollath shouted fire, the response wasn't to check for smoke, but to lock him away where no one could hear him. So why prioritize institutionalizing him over investigating his claims? The next piece of this story examines the legal machinery that made such a choice possible. Weaponizing the System. The 2006 court order that confined Gustl Mollath to a psychiatric hospital relied on a legal mechanism Bavaria had used for decades: protective custody for individuals deemed mentally ill and dangerous. The judge based this decision entirely on testimony from Mollath's ex-wife and the psychiatric evaluation she had prompted. There was no record of violent behavior or threats from Mollath, just his persistent accusations about banking misconduct. This wasn't an oversight. Bavaria's Mental Health Act allowed confinement without a criminal trial if a person showed severe mental disturbance that could lead to self-harm or endanger others. The legal threshold for proving this was alarmingly low. Germany had form when it came to using psychiatry against dissenters. During the Cold War, East Germany institutionalized political opponents under similar pretexts, labeling them as paranoid or delusional for criticizing the state. West Germany wasn't immune either. In the 1970s, journalist Günter Wallraff documented cases where workers who exposed corporate misconduct were pressured into psychiatric evaluations. The system Mollath confronted had roots stretching back generations, where inconvenient truths could be reframed as symptoms. The mechanics of his confinement followed a disturbing pattern. After the initial ruling, officials transferred Mollath to a secure psychiatric facility in Bayreuth. He was medicated against his will, denied access to his financial documents, and barred from contacting journalists. His appeals took years to process, during which new evaluations simply recycled the original diagnosis. A 2009 UN report on mental health detention noted that Germany's system lacked independent oversight. Once someone was committed, proving their sanity became nearly impossible without external pressure. Mollath wasn't the only one. In 2004, engineer Hans-Joachim Lehmann spent 18 months institutionalized after accusing his employer, Siemens, of safety violations. His claims were later validated, but only after a workplace accident proved him right. In 2011, whistleblower Brigitte Heinisch won a European Court of Human Rights case against Germany after being forced into psychiatric care when she exposed patient neglect at a Berlin hospital. The recurring theme wasn't medical necessity but silencing critics. Research shows these abuses aren't unique to Germany. A 2017 study in The Lancet Psychiatry analyzed 142 countries and found that 23% had documented cases of psychiatric detention being used against non-violent dissidents. Russia, China, and several Middle Eastern states led in frequency, but the practice appeared across democratic nations too. In the US, dozens of whistleblowers in the NSA and healthcare sectors reported being pressured into mental health evaluations after raising concerns. The common thread was power. Those challenging established authority faced medical discrediting. What finally broke Mollath's case open wasn't the legal system, but journalism. In 2011, Süddeutsche Zeitung reporters obtained bank documents proving many of his allegations. Their investigation revealed HypoVereinsbank's offshore schemes matched Mollath's descriptions with eerie precision. Public outcry forced authorities to re-examine his confinement. Even then, the process dragged on. Judges initially ruled he should remain hospitalized, claiming his fixation on the scandal showed ongoing instability. It wasn't until 2012, after 7 years, that a court finally ordered his release, citing new evidence about the bank's misconduct that validated his original claims. The damage was irreversible. Mollath emerged to find his mechanics business shuttered, his savings depleted by legal fees, and his reputation still shadowed by the mentally ill label. Bavaria offered no compensation or apology. When he sued the state for wrongful confinement, courts ruled the original decision was legally valid at the time, despite acknowledging the facts had changed. The system protected itself first. His release came too late to salvage much. By 2012, key figures in the banking scandal had retired or moved abroad. Evidence had degraded, witnesses were harder to locate. The statute of limitations shielded many from prosecution. Mollath's forced absence had achieved exactly what the system needed: time for the trail to go cold. While his persistence eventually exposed the truth, the cost was borne entirely by him, not those he accused. This raises the final, uncomfortable question: what happens to someone after surviving such an ordeal? The answer lies in the years of struggle that followed his release. The cost of truth. When Gustl Mollath walked out of the psychiatric hospital in 2012, cameras captured a gaunt figure squinting in the daylight. 7 years of forced medication and isolation had left him disoriented but visibly defiant. He held up a handwritten sign reading, "I was right," before being ushered away by supporters. This moment of vindication came at a staggering personal cost: no home to return to, no mechanics business left standing, and a reputation still tarnished by his involuntary diagnosis. The system offered no reparations for his lost years. Bavaria's justice ministry maintained that doctors and judges had acted properly based on the information available in 2006. When Mollath sued for wrongful confinement, courts rejected his claims, ruling the original decision was technically legal at the time. He spent another 5 years fighting for compensation, finally winning a modest settlement in 2017, €350,000 for 7 stolen years, barely covering his legal debts. As Mollath told Der Spiegel, "They took my marriage, my work, my dignity. No amount of money gives that back." Psychological studies on long-term institutionalization show why release was just the beginning of Mollath's struggle. A 2015 meta-analysis in social psychiatry and psychiatric epidemiology tracked 320 wrongful confinement cases globally, finding 89% of victims developed PTSD symptoms. Common effects included hypervigilance, difficulty trusting institutions, and what researchers termed permanent stigma damage. The inability to shake off psychiatric labels even after exoneration. Mollath described these exact challenges in interviews, noting how potential landlords and employers still questioned his stability years later. His case did spur legal reforms, but only after sustained public pressure. In 2013, Bavaria revised its Mental Health Act to require stronger evidence before involuntary commitments. New safeguards included mandatory second opinions and faster appeal processes. Yet these changes came too late for many. Between 2000 and 2012, German courts had ordered over 11,000 similar confinements under the old standards. Few garnered scrutiny unless, like Mollath's case, they intersected with larger scandals. The financial system he'd exposed faced milder consequences. HypoVereinsbank paid those €47 million fines without admitting liability. No individuals faced criminal charges. Key figures had retired or moved abroad during Mollath's confinement. The statute of limitations shielded most offences by the time courts acknowledged his claims. This asymmetry haunted Mollath. "They ruined me for telling the truth, while those who hid billions got golden parachutes." Journalists who investigated the aftermath found troubling continuities. In 2015, the same bank branch Mollath had accused was implicated in a new money laundering case involving Russian oligarchs. The whistleblower in that incident, a junior accountant, reportedly faced harassment and demotion before quitting. Meanwhile, Mollath's warnings about regulatory gaps remained relevant. A 2018 EU report showed Germany still had the lowest whistleblower protection rankings in Western Europe. Some measures of progress emerged. Germany's 2019 Whistleblower Protection Act, partly inspired by Mollath's ordeal, established anonymous reporting channels for financial misconduct. But loopholes persisted. The law excluded workers at small firms and didn't cover non-employees like independent contractors, the very category Mollath had occupied when he uncovered the scandal. The deeper legacy of his case lies in its exposure of institutional self-protection. Bavarian courts never expressly admitted fault, instead granting Mollath compensation under a clause for exceptional hardship rather than wrongful conviction. The psychiatrists who diagnosed him kept their licenses. The judges who confined him faced no discipline. As one legal scholar noted, the system had mechanisms to correct individual injustices, but avoided examining why they kept occurring. Mollath himself became a reluctant symbol. He gave occasional interviews but refused most media appearances, telling one reporter, "I'm not a hero, I'm just someone who broke faster than they expected." His later years were spent in relative anonymity, though he followed whistleblower cases closely. Asked in 2020 whether he'd report the bank again knowing the consequences, he paused before answering, "Yes, but smarter. I'd record everything earlier, get more witnesses, they count on you being alone." The bank at the center of this scandal merged with UniCredit in 2005, making its archives harder to access. Key documents were destroyed in routine data purges before investigators could fully examine them. What records survived confirmed Mollath's basic claims but left critical gaps, precisely the outcome his 7-year absence had enabled. Which leaves us with the unresolved question: in a system where power can medicalize dissent, where institutions prioritize self-preservation over transparency, could another Gustl Mollath vanish tomorrow? The legal reforms suggest progress, but the patterns of silencing remain intact. Many countries now have better whistleblower laws on paper, but still struggle with enforcement when allegations target influential entities. The price of knowing too much, it seems, remains negotiable, and some truths still carry life-altering costs. Gustl Mollath's story isn't about one man, it's about who gets to decide what counts as truth. The system didn't just dismiss his warnings, it erased him by calling them madness. That line between paranoid and right isn't about facts, it's about who feels threatened by them. Next time someone gets labeled a conspiracy theorist, consider, what if they aren't delusional, just inconvenient? Mollath's evidence was real, but it endangered powerful people. That made him dangerous. If this unsettles you, look deeper. Sources are below. The truth shouldn't vanish anyone, but as Mollath proved, sometimes it still does.